we're going to look at some of the biggest games from week 13 through the eyes of Sumer Sports' computer vision, AI tracking metrics, and of course, our film perspective as well. Sam, I think we have to start with the Eagles' huge win over the Ravens. They go into Baltimore, they extend their win streak to 8 games, where their defense really took care of one of the best offenses in the league in such an impressive way. And I thought that this was a game where the Ravens were going to be able to produce a whole lot more. I thought that the Eagles did a really good job in their base personnel against some of those early down runs where it just feels like they're happy if you're going to get heavy on them, which makes me really interested in a potential matchup down the line between, maybe if the Eagles find a way to get into the NFC Championship game, if the Lions are there, I think that would be a lot of fun. The defense overall, that's really what I want to talk about. Just a young, physical unit. They fly to the ball. They tackle well. They have our guy, all pro, Zach Vaughn, Nakobe Dean playing fast, Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, just huge draft pick hits. And really, the question I had was their edge rusher unit, because they've had a bunch of injuries there. Their production was slowing up, but it feels like they're coming along. Of course, they have Jalen Carter inside. I thought the defensive line just did a really, really good job in this game.
Right. I think the edge rusher unit is still coming along to a certain degree, but as you mentioned, the interior defensive line is the absolute strength of this front. In this game, Milton Williams, Jordan Davis, Ojomo, Jalen Carter were all above the 80th percentile in our pass rushing all-in-one metric. That means so much when you're able to push that pocket in the middle against a player like Lamar Jackson, flush him out of the pocket. Obviously, he always is able to create in those situations, but all year we've seen Lamar want to stay in the pocket and want to pick you apart. And the Eagles just did not allow him to do that all game. At volume, Williams was absolutely outstanding, over 26 snaps. Jalen Carter never comes out of the game. He was a little subpar in finishing, but he was great in get off, and he was causing all types of problems for that offense. I know there may have been a holding or two that the Eagles community was a little upset didn't get called, but Jalen Carter having a fantastic year. The run defense wasn't absolutely fantastic, but I think they were really committed to making Lamar uncomfortable in the pass rush at all cost in this game. And it worked out. They held Lamar to 52nd percentile elusiveness, 40th percentile sack avoidance, and 19th percentile rushing in terms of the all-in-one metric. That's just production that we have not seen from Lamar Jackson all year, and you got to give it up to the Philadelphia Eagles front for forcing him into those tough positions.
They forced Lamar Jackson into superhero mode. And look, he was able to make a bunch of plays. I don't want to pretend like he got nothing on the day. But like I said, like if you're happy to face some of those heavy personnels, like the changeup that they have, it's just like where it affects other teams, it may just not affect you the same way. Where we think back to the Eagles in week 2, getting heavy personnel from the Saints and just like shutting them down over and over. So just a really, really just a great unit. Like Sam, I think it's probably the best defense in the league now. Like I was thinking about, who else would I put over them? Like maybe the Vikings. Like, I think I'd probably maybe take the Eagles over them. And then thinking about maybe the Steelers. You see what the Bengals do to the Steelers. We'll talk about that later. And then what the Eagles did to the Bengals, it's just like, wow. Like it's such an unbelievable flip from literally one of the bottom units in most metrics last year to arguably the best defense in football. Obviously, a lot of credit to Vic Fangio. Really credit to every single player on that defense is, I think, doing their job at such a high level where you have like backup safeties matching routes perfectly. And that's always a sign to me of these really well-coached teams. Like I really like watching Vic Fangio's defenses in the preseason when it's like the 4th string cornerback doing like the exact perfect job. Because to me, that feels like the teaching is just going through every single player at a really high level. Of course, it's going to be on the players, and you're not able to get this much of high quality performance if you're not just hitting on Mitchell, hitting on DeJean, hitting on Vaughn. And Dean is able to kind of explode through as well. So just a really, really fun unit. And what a run for the Eagles. Sam, let's move on here to our guy, Sam Darnold, where one narrative for the Vikings was, were they going to be able to deal with, expected pass, like you got to have it sort of situations? And Arizona, I like their plan on defense early in the game where you're generating a bunch of pressure. You're getting free runners. I mean, are you blitzing 13 people? It really felt like they were doing a lot and leaning into that variant. So I thought that was a good job. Then the Vikings go down 13. Darnold settles in a really, really huge step. I feel like the defense was locked in there as well. But to see the Vikings able to, you are down 13 late in the 3rd quarter, you are going to have to pass the ball, and to be able to get that from the Vikings, I feel like that is just a great sign for a team that is like really, really good. Like they really are good. And I don't know, like, do we do the for real? Are they not for real? I think like they are a legitimate contender in the NFC, particularly because of the defense, but also, I mean, I think things are just clicking for Darnold. What did some of the metrics have to say for Sam Darnold?
What the metrics had to say was pretty simple when it comes down to it, and it's that when you're accurate and you make big throws, you have a quality game. He was 87th percentile in terms of accuracy according to the tracking metrics. He was 77th percentile in terms of big throw in terms of the tracking metrics. He didn't exactly show up in terms of EPA per pass, 36th percentile there, but altogether, he had a very good game throwing the ball. I think where the EPA was really lost and where he needs to kind of look for improvement as we get into these tougher NFC North games and into the playoffs is sacks. 5 sacks, 14th percentile sack avoidance. And that is against a Cardinals defense, which has struggled at times this year. If he can clean up that part of his game, along with, continuing to improve his decision making, I think Darnold is going to be a guy that we continue talking about not only in the playoffs and as the regular season ends, but also into the offseason. I think he's going to cause, a lot of great questions for the Vikings if you're trying to choose between a highly touted prospect and Sam Darnold, who played really well, and also some other teams should he be in the free agency discussions of maybe someone like the 49ers, maybe someone like the Raiders. There's a lot of stuff kind of outside there as well.
Look, I love it. I love the Darnold Renaissance. Like just keep it going, Sam. I really, really am happy to see that. And there was one interesting situation in this game for the Cardinals offense where they had a 4th and goal on the 4 yard line. There's about 3 minutes left in the game. They're up by 3. They had all 3 timeouts. The Vikings only had 1 timeout. So you have the situation: do you kick a field goal to go up by 6? Do you go for it? Try and really like you're knocking down the game at that point. And I just think it's an interesting thing to look at where going up by 6, obviously 6 is greater than 3. Sam, I always appreciate your math help. I don't think I needed your math help for that particular data point, but it changes the psychology of the game where the offense now can use all 4 downs. They know they're going to use all 4 downs. They're not going to get conservative when they get close to a field goal. And there was a situation where the Vikings had a 4th and 5 on the Cardinals 33-yard line where they probably would have kicked in that situation if they were only up by 3. They hit their kicker hit a 55-yarder earlier in the game. Instead, the Vikings go for it. They go down. They score. Now they're up by 1 instead of maybe kicking that field goal to tie. The Cardinals did have a minute left. They ended up throwing an interception on that drive following. But I think an interesting thing to look at for the, Sam, I feel like it's a point for the analytics community. We get this situation. We get the situation early on with, I think it was week 3, the Eagles and the Falcons, where the Eagles kick to go up 6. The Falcons go down and score. I mean, have the numbers gone too far here, Sam?
The interesting thing with this particular situation is that it is based off of kind of human behavior to a certain degree. And that is the idea that you tend to be more conservative when you only have to go get a field goal to tie. And so you're willing to risk, the biscuit a little bit more to try to go further ahead rather than just put yourself in a position where a team has to get a touchdown, but they are also kind of in the driver's seat if they get a touchdown, just given the probability of making an extra point. A place where we see this similar discussion of conservatism versus aggressiveness forced by the score is 2-point conversions at the end of the game to, go up in essence 1 or to take the win. And it really is interesting how it breaks down. That's some of these scenarios are very hard to go against the players. I know there's a lot of discussion on the sideline between the guys in the box, the guys on the field, the players of what's going on. And sometimes it's hard to like tell your quarterback, no, we're not going for 2 here, or to tell your team, which just fought to put yourself in field goal position, no, we're not taking the points here. I'm willing to risk it. It's just that over time, I mean, we've seen play after play after play and situation after situation after situation. The NFL forces all these tough late game decisions, and it typically goes the way of you don't want to kick to go up 6 because human behavior tells us that those teams are going to be aggressive. The Minnesota Vikings were aggressive. They go down and score a touchdown, and then that game ends up ending at that score.
The aggressive lean, I think that's just like I just have that in me. Like I assume
Right.
you have it in you too. Like it's so easy for us to behind the microphones, like look at the decision and say like, look, my job's not on the line if they go for it. Like it's just not. So it's really easy to make that decision from the outside where sticking from the status quo, just or sticking to the status quo, just creating less friction there. Like maybe just draws less questions. And I like that you mentioned, the human aspect of it. Like the Eagles had a fourth down situation, and look, the Eagles have a forward-minded analytic staff, and that they're constantly feeding information to Nick Sirianni. Sirianni is constantly pulling for them, as he talks about over and over. But when they asked him about one of the decisions to go for it, he was like, "Yeah, Saquon looked at me and said go, and Devontae Smith looked at me and said go, so we went." And obviously, there is more to that, and there is more reasoning, but there it is such just a human aspect of it, right? And there we think of
Right.
the clips of like Lamar Jackson saying, "Hey, let's go for it," to Harbaugh. Like that's just a true fact. And of course, we don't know all the situations in terms of like ESPN's model was like a strong go, and it was based on a fourth down conversion percentage that was higher than what the Cardinals have had this year. So if you're projecting in that situation, maybe it's historically like you are pushing in one direction, but then internally you can have just like a low conversion probability. Maybe it's like, well, what's left on Drew Petzing's call sheet? I mean, Kyler Murray is obviously a great play extending quarterback. I don't know. Did something happen in some sort of situation? So there's so many factors like to look at it in isolation. These guys need to make these decisions just like in a snap.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that I come from a staff in, Willie Fritz, who now is the coach at Houston, who was always really, really aggressive. And the corollary to that in the NFL, obviously, is the Detroit Lions. And sometimes aggressiveness is not always the quote analytical way to go. I mean, sometimes it is just kick the extra point instead of going for two based on the human behavior. So it really is an interesting mix of sometimes you do the quote more conservative thing, but sometimes, and in the case of the Cardinals yesterday, they should have done the more aggressive thing.
Yeah, it's like the word analytics like gets a bad name, and it's like, I'm a scheme guy, but to me it's just evidence, right? Like it's all just data points. It's all this information. We're trying to make
Precisely.
good decisions here, trying to increase your win probability in games where the margins are so thin. Sam, let's move on here to Russell Wilson going over 400 yards, getting 3 touchdowns against the Cincinnati Bengals. And I mean, it was a like must win because every game was a must win for the Bengals. Like you cannot afford to lose that game under any circumstances. And Russell Wilson really lit them up. And I just was I've been impressed over the last 2 weeks. Sam, I've been slow onto the train. I'm not saying that the Steelers feel like the offense is fully figured out, but I thought on against the Browns in the snow on Thursday night, we saw just like a little bit of play extension and like more throws than just, hey, I'm throwing this ball deep outside. That really nice throw down the middle of the field. We get another one in this Bengals game, and he moves around a little bit. So it feels like you are adding just a little bit to his game, which is really positive. Maybe that feels like Arthur Smith can expand things just a little bit. You can attack different areas of the field. Like if you want to be a team that is going to bump your safeties out to those outside verticals, as one would think that they should. Now they can hit you down the middle of the field. So I'm really interested to see when the Steelers play the Eagles. But what do you have for Russell Wilson in the game against the Bengals?
It was an absolutely fantastic from Dangerous in this game. 96 percentile production over expected. Nearly everything was about above average. That just shows that this was a great performance from a player who has seen a renaissance, kind of as you mentioned. Sean, timing and accuracy were very good. 90th percentile EPA per play. Now, how much of this comes from a Bengals defense who we have not loved all season and have decried their performance, particularly in the face of an MVP esque Joe Burrow season on the other side of the ball? Who knows? But what I'm really wondering from you, Sean, is how much of this is sustainable from a scheme perspective? I mean, Russ is pretty solidly top 10 across our computer vision metrics, but it seems as if a lot of this is coming from big plays. And we know that, particularly as you get into the playoffs, some of those big plays dry up a little bit when you have to face some of these great defenses that are in the AFC. Do you think, from a scheme perspective, Sean, that he can continue hitting these long passes and great plays to guys like George Pickens and other guys that they have on this team? Or do you think this is kind of like a midseason blip?
The outside throws feels like it's less scheme and it's more just okay. Like these Steelers have like this unbelievable ability to come down with the ball and those high like completion percentage over expected games. Like a lot of that credit has to go to the receivers. Like, of course, the ball has to be in a great spot, but the receivers are making that play. And it feels like, the further down the field, like the receivers should maybe get more and more credit. And like, it's not to take anything away from Russell Wilson. It's just like there can be variance there. Again, my schematic thing is if you're able to extend plays, if you're able to throw down the middle of the field when those safeties bump out to stop your outside verticals, like that is a really positive thing. And I guess I don't want to like jump on it too quick again. Two good performances where it felt like we were starting to see things that he just didn't have as much in other parts of the year. So I think it's moving in the right direction. I think I'm fine being a little bit slow on the Steelers bandwagon overall. I thought the defense, struggled a little bit. Obviously, the Bengals are just an awesome offense. And, as you mentioned, the Joe Burrow MVP season. Can we give the MVP to a team with 4 wins? I don't know, Sam. I don't know. Let's move on here to the Chargers win over the Falcons, where Sam, they scored a grand total of 0 touchdowns. They still won, or sorry, 0 offensive touchdowns. They scored a touchdown on defense. They were still able to beat the Falcons. I think Jesse Mentor's defense, they've been able to fit the run from light boxes. They're able to match coverages. It's just like really, really tight 2 routes, and just their distribution has looked pretty fun. They, of course, get 4 interceptions in this game. What do the metrics have to say about the Chargers defense?
This was a really fun game to break down just on paper, having watched the game live, because you're watching the game live and you're thinking to yourself, oh my God, Kirk Cousins is melting down. He has 4 picks. Then you go deeper just into the numbers to get a view of it kind of at the 2D level, not necessarily the 3 or 4D level. And it wasn't necessarily a particularly great pass rush game from the Chargers front, which we typically would think that guys like Khalil Mack would be causing a lot of these problems. Now, the frame based metrics did like it a little bit more. So, what I figured there is that they were able to get great pressure on him, but not necessarily be able to finish. Sure enough, that pops up when you look at our computer vision metrics. Poor finishing. However, several above average get off scores from some of those guys in the pass rushing front. Pretty substandard, however, in terms of finishing. So it must be the coverage. Sure enough, several guys near the 90th percentile in that defensive backfield for the Chargers. Derwin James, Tony Jefferson, Tarheeb Still in particular were able to make plays. Sure enough, 2 of those guys had picks. Tony Jefferson also had an excellent game in terms of the number of tackles that he had. It was just kind of a good game from this coverage unit. And I think the Harbaugh offense, dang it, I think the Harbaugh defense at this point is just so well rounded and has guys at each position that can make plays that when they go up against a team that is prone to some mistakes and has seen some decline in previous weeks, they're able to take advantage of it and they're able to basically win the game when the offense can't make it happen.
The Chargers have the Chiefs next week. The Chiefs, of course, off that shenanigans win over the Raiders on Black Friday. The Chargers played the Chiefs really, really tight early in the season. I think that the Chargers offense in the game against the Falcons, they of course didn't score a touchdown, but Lad McConkey had over 100 yards. That's interesting to see. I think that Herbert has been really good on play action. Herbert's just a stud, but he is really good on play action. So I'm really interested to see the Chiefs defense that has struggled just a bit. I'm interested what is going to happen there. Sam, staying in the AFC here, the Buffalo Bills will win the snow game against the 49ers, where our guy Tage was at that game. I'm hope he's thawed out by now. He was sending us pictures. He hasn't texted us in a little bit. I mean, I just hope he's warmed up with a hot cup of cocoa. Now, I think I want to talk about the Bills' run game in this one. It feels like Joe Brady's head coaching candidacy has just continued to bump up as his offense is expanding in different ways. You get a little bit heavy at different times. You're able to be creative in the run game. You're able to get just like high level play out of Josh Allen, which of course you are, but it feels like Allen's also doing a great job keeping his mistakes low. And then you get the fun, just let me follow my throw, get a lateral, and go full hilarity here. What do we have for the Buffalo Bills?
The Buffalo Bills run game has been really interesting. I came into this thinking that it was going to be a domination up front, given all of the injuries that the 49ers have had on their defensive front. It kind of was. Great game from Spencer Brown, 92nd percentile in terms of run blocking. Also want to give a shout out to David Edwards. Good game from the left guard there. But the running backs have been excellent all year for the Buffalo Bills. And it's really shocking because we know about James Cook and fantasy people know about James Cook, but Ty Johnson and Ray Davis have also been fantastic. All 3 backs in this game were over the 80th percentile in rush yards over expected. Johnson and Davis near the 90th percentile in our all-in-one metric, and Davis and Cook near or above the 80th percentile in elusiveness. The metrics are saying that the backs are taking advantage of every opportunity that they are given. And this is kind of a wild stat to me, Sean. For the entire year, all three of those backs are over the 66th percentile. So in the top third of all backs that we've tracked over the years in every single rushing metric that we track using computer vision models. A fantastic year from them being able to complement Josh Allen, who's been having a very good passing year and a rushing year, and apparently a good receiving year. If you really break down how they track that touchdown that he got from Amari Cooper, it's just a beautiful offense that's coming together with a lot of great players from the guys that are in that backfield.
Sam, I love that you mentioned the like how or the receiving aspect of it because you don't get a reception, but you get receiving yards and a receiving touchdown. You know the numbers, guys. It's tough for all of you guys out there. It feels like it hasn't been really tough for the Bills overall. Where I think they're just the best team in the league. Like they're going to face the Lions soon. That's going to be a lot of fun. But I love this offense. I obviously you can see Josh Allen just go nuclear like whenever it is going to happen. So that's always something you have to be concerned about on the defensive side, but I really liked how this defense has been playing just at really all three levels for Buffalo. I thought the 49ers were able to get a little bit going in the run game. Of course, that Christian McCaffrey injury is just such a bummer. Sam, I don't know if you have any thoughts just about kind of the state of the 49ers overall. Of course, you know, I'm always rooting for Kyle Shanahan for the offense. You're going to have Brock Purdy coming up. Obviously, tons of injuries. The roster's aging a little bit. It feels in a way that, hey, the window's closing, but at the same time, like we've said that before, and then they're able to come back. I don't know if you have just any thoughts on where San Francisco is at right now.
The good news is they got a lot of their young guys under contract. Brandon Ayuk is a young guy. I'm not going to read too deeply into his injury. Wasn't able exactly to get it all together at the beginning of this year, but I still think he's an excellent player. And the thing that they've been missing all year are those perimeter throws from Purdy to Ayuk. I think he's going to be a key part of their offense. They also have Jawan Jennings, who's been excellent this year. Looks like a certified quality outside receiver. They have him on a very team friendly extension that they locked him up on this year. And then Nick Bosa obviously is also under contract. And you've seen some good stuff from guys like Malik Mustafa, Fred Werner obviously will always be involved. The question becomes, you know, these older guys that are injured, how do you start to manage them from a cap perspective? Your Trent Williamses, your Christian McCaffreys in the face of $63 million potentially going to Brock Purdy. Now, who knows how that negotiation lays out? I think there's good discussions, maybe a 10 to $15 million deal range that could be, you know, played around with by the team and the agent. But they have basically a $63 million outlay that they are currently not outlaying right now because Brock Purdy was a seventh round pick. It's just going to be really interesting to see how they manage their cap, given that they've had fantastic players who have performed even past their prime as studs in this league. Very difficult to manage. The cap is a very cruel beast, Sean Syed.
Sam, let's stay in the NFC West. I want to talk about the Seahawks defense, where it feels like they really put it together over the last few weeks. They're able to come back against the Jets in a game where, I mean, the Seahawks kick return unit and kickoff unit just had a bunch of struggles, a bunch of fumbles, a bunch of things happening where the Jets are able to go up early. The defense is really able to get jump started on a really nice pick six from Leonard Williams, part of a pressure plan where you're dropping right into the window where Rodgers is going to throw hot. You deflect it, you catch it, you finish the run at that over 300-pound level was really cool to see. What you have overall for the Seahawks defense.
I just love Leonard Williams's play. I know there was a lot of people that were kind of out on him and thought that he was going into, you know, the closing era of his career. And then Mike McDonald came into the fray, and they're just soulmates, man. I mean, we saw Mike McDonald do great stuff with Namdi Madubuike. He's doing the same fantastic stuff with Leonard Williams. As you mentioned, dropping back into coverage, massive play. We had him on our all pro list. I may be, you know, jumping ahead of the fray a little bit, but he's probably going to be on our all pro list at the end of the season. Huge pick six, around the top quarter in terms of pass rushing, 80th plus percentile in both run pursuit, get off, and finish. He's been doing it both in the pass rush and the run game all year. He's an absolute game breaker for the Seahawks. I also want to give a shout out to Julian Love, 97th percentile in terms of coverage in this game. He's another addition to that Seahawks defense over the years that has been fantastic. He's playing really well. He's a crux of their defensive plan. Kobe Bryant, another good year. Kobe Bryant, another good game. Shawn, good game, good play from those safeties. That's what you want to see. I'd like to see a little bit of more consistency from the corners, but I think they are physical. This Seahawks defense is kind of rounding into shape, and that's kind of what we expected given several weeks of Mike McDonald coaching at this point.
I love the mention of Leonard Williams being Mike McDonald's soulmate. Like, look, they're so well tied together. McDonald's able to benefit so much when you have someone that strong on the defensive line. Let's move on here to the Washington Commanders, where Sam they really were able to get back on track, particularly on the ground in the running game against the Tennessee Titans defense. That they are high up in a lot of EPA per rush metrics allowed, and then success rate per rush allowed. So I thought it was an impressive day for the Commanders, where you're able to get multiple backs involved. Brian Robinson's able to go over 100 yards. You have like above a 95th percentile EPA per rush and success rate on the ground. So just a really, really positive kind of bounce back performance after dealing with a bunch of those losses. Jaden Daniels looked more healthy. He's able to make those accurate throws again. And look, I mean, this team's just going to be in the playoffs. Like they're going to almost certainly be that last team in the playoffs unless things kind of shake out in a tough way for them. So I was happy to see them get back on track there. What some of the metrics have for us?
Yeah, so coming into this game, the Titans are not a bad defense. They were ninth in EPA per rush coming into the game. This was another fun onion pullback in looking at how the Commanders were successful in this game because I immediately assumed that the offensive line was again pushing their weight against a stout Tennessee front, but they were really near or above average blocking from all the linemen. Biotish was very good. Sam Cosmi was very good, but there was elite blocking from the tight ends. And so then you go a step further and you see how they're utilizing these tight ends in the run game. The guys like Ertz, Bates, Sennett. Coming into the game, they were eighth in EPA in 12 personnel, led primarily by being seventh in EPA per rush in that personnel package. They're also fifth in usage of 13 personnel. They have 44 plays there. They're one of the 6 teams who use it at a greater than 5% clip. It's really interesting to see how Cliff Kingsbury is taking advantage of those heavier packages and those tight ends' multiple ability to both pass catch and block and use it to his advantage, particularly given he has a good rushing quarterback in Jaden Daniels and some excellent players such as Brian Robinson in the backfield. In all 3 metrics, he was near the top quarter for this game, and a quality game from Chris Rodriguez as well, 96th percentile in his kind of limited role in the all-in-one rushing metric there. If they can continue pushing this rushing game forward, I think they're really going to be an interesting kind of sleeper playoff team, particularly because, we talk about this smash mouth football that we've seen all year. I think the Lions just have, fantastic players. I think the Eagles have a fantastic offensive line and Saquon Barkley, who is, a multi-time Pro Bowler. But I think the Commanders, the way that they utilize their personnel groupings and their scheme from the run game matches well with their analytics coming out of the back end. And it's really interesting to see how they, who kind of were looked at prior to the season as having a talent deficit or at least a talent question mark at many of the positions along that offense, have turned it into a real strength, that type of smash mouth football.
Sam, it wouldn't be, a Shawn and Sam show unless we talked about Anthony Richardson and Bryce Young. Those are the last two we're going to finish off with here, where Richardson, again, I imagine that the metrics are going to tell kind of a similar story that we have talked about. Some of the drops in this game were pretty rough. I was really happy, though, that Shane Steichen made the decision to go for 2. Of course, we talked about the decisions kind of earlier in the pod, but you go for 2, you go for the win, you trust your guy. Richardson's able to just push through and get that. And Sam, I will say that the jumping 360 spike is so cool. Like it's absolutely a signature celebration. So if there's any reason to root for Anthony Richardson, it's so that we can see more of those. And even just that last drive overall, you convert multiple third downs, you convert multiple fourth downs. It's like an 18 play drive that's able to get you down there. And I mean, the Patriots were close to on the way back. Well, it's unfortunate, Sam, that we don't get to talk about Drake May because Anthony Richardson overshadowed him with a win. What do you have here for Anthony Richardson?
Unfortunately, it was kind of back to the same old song with Anthony Richardson. in this game. However, he was very effective in the running game, which I think was the differentiator. You mentioned that 2-point conversion, obviously, as well. Elite sack avoidance, 95th percentile. Fantastic decision making. That's been the thing that sets him apart. That's been his kind of light in the darkness all year, 83rd percentile. Above average timing. He's just on the floor in terms of accuracy. Sub 20th percentile there, sub 20th percentile as a result in production over expected and the all in one metric, but he was fantastic in the running game. As I mentioned, 89th percentile. I'm so interested in the offseason to deep dive kind of what is causing these accuracy issues and whether it is things like you mentioned at the top of the pod, Shawn, where he is kind of letting it fly. He has a high average depth of target. It's probably a little bit more difficult for these receivers to make sure those are completed. Is it more of that? Is some scheme perhaps going to change going into next year? Are they going to, identify some mid-range throws that perhaps he can make? It's just so strange that you have this dichotomy that we've seen all year from Anthony Richardson, where he's making really good decisions. He's fairly effective in the run game, and he's not really getting sacked, but it's just they can't put it all together. I don't know if it's in particularly because of his accuracy alone. Is it because of the drops? Is it because of the routes? I think it's going to be really fun to kind of paint that picture as we move forward into the offseason.
Sam, this is it's such a fun one to think about because every time when I'm looking at the numbers, it's like, oh, 99th percentile average depth of target. Like he is just pushing up the historical average for average depth of target because he keeps on having these just like absurd, like 16-yard average depth of target games where I mean the offense is built in a way that it's an interesting formula that I think can work where you're able to succeed on the ground. Of course, the defense has to respect your quarterback in the run game. Linebacker's going to flow a little bit to Richardson. It's going to open up a little bit more space for Jonathan Taylor inside, and then you're just take a bunch of shots. And yeah, like you're gonna hit some of those, you're gonna miss some of those. But I like them really stressing a defense in those sorts of ways. Again, like there were drops in this game, and it feels like there's drops in every single game. And I guess I more bring that up because when you just look at the completion percentage, it's like, like you can't like survive with the 50% completion percentage all the time. But at the same time, it doesn't feel like, hey, it's just Richardson. It's not that it's not Richardson as well. So it's a really kind of fun thing to look at. And I mean, it like I just can't not bet on him. Like it's too fun. Sam, I mentioned the jumping 360 spike. I love it. I love it. Like my nephews are gonna be doing that, just walking down the street as much as they can. Just spiking that football. And Sam, we end here with Bryce Young moving in the right direction. I know you were absolutely glued to that Panthers Buccaneers game. I'm watching the Eagles Ravens game on the main screen. Obviously, I have it on the side screen. I keep getting these texts from you talking about what's going on. A bunch of nice throws, some tough receiver play at different times. Really, Sam, like in our time together on the Stats and Scheme podcast, like the Bryce Young narrative is flipping. It's really, really fun to see. And like, did I love his play early in the season? No, obviously not. Neither did the Panthers. I'm sure neither did he. But to like watch a guy just forming into shape a little bit more in real time is really, really cool. And look, does the 2, 3, 4 week sample like tell us more than the larger sample? Maybe not, but I like to just feel positive about it, I think. So what'd you see from Bryce Young here in that game against the Buccaneers?
The Bryce Young arrow is certainly going up, and I got to give a shout out to Dave Canals because we're watching this game where Baker seems to be, flustered a little bit at the beginning, but he's taking advantage of Mike Evans being back. And then on the flip side, we're seeing Bryce Young play well. Then Baker starts playing well, and it's like, look at Dave's two guys just producing at a high level and making this an extremely fun game to watch. These are two guys that I heavily believed in going into their quote comeback seasons. We've seen Baker be able to do it kind of by himself this year. We're now seeing Bryce Young starting to put the pieces together. The thing that has been the separator for him from the early year to the second part of the year has been the sack avoidance. Absolutely key given his frame to be elite in sack avoidance. He cannot be average. Sure enough, he was elite in sack avoidance. In this game, he was also elite in decision making. That's what we'd love to see from the young quarterback. He was slightly above average in pretty much everything else, but he was slightly above average, period. Like it was a great game. He was a plus player in this game. That's the track that you want to see him going as we end this year. I think Dave Canales is kind of following the Dan Campbell plan to making people excited about a team. Very poor at the beginning of the year. It seems like everything's all over the place. a few pieces end up sticking. All of a sudden, you're excited, but you still have potential to get a top 5, top 10 pick there. But you seem to be a very difficult team for even a Chiefs level team to beat. You go into next year, you start finishing around 500, you make a little bit of noise, and then maybe in 3 years, like Bryce Young, we're talking about a guy like Jared Goff, who started off very slow, and now he's a good quarterback. And they have kind of all the pieces intact, especially with a guy like Derek Brown coming back on the defense. I just like what I'm seeing. Some things that Bryce probably should work on. He was dead last this week among qualifiers in timing. Got to clean that up. But at the same time, you mentioned it a little bit. I'd love to hear your thoughts. We flipped from this narrative where we were really excited about Xavier Legette. We were really, really excited about the progression we've seen from Jalen Kirker early on in the season. I know he's had injuries there. Adam Thielen, fantastic game. Really probably should have had a touchdown that was not counted. We saw him make one-hand catches, big catches down the end, but it's almost become like, wait, the wide receivers need to let Bryce cook, man. Like they're kind of, there were some key drops, there were some key miscommunications, and you're like, wait, Bryce is cooking. Like, let's get on the same page, boys, because Bryce is accurate. He's doing some fantastic stuff. I love to see it from a team who I was a little higher on than the consensus back in the preseason. Didn't love what I saw early year, but then all of a sudden the pieces that I saw to begin with are coming together. And that's all you can ask for a young team.
Look, I love it. I mean, no one loves the Panthers Lions connection more than you. So I'm glad we get to keep on having that. And I'm fascinated to see just what the Panthers decide on, what their evaluations of quarterbacks in the upcoming draft are, how they're going to deal with the situation with Young, or what they feel like about his play over the last few weeks. And then, of course, just overall, like is he going to end the season? Just I think how things will look in that way. And I do think, Cal is building things in just a good way. So I do really like what I see. Like it's easy to root for Bryce Young, and I feel like multiple quarterbacks we've talked on this podcast and over the last few weeks is just look like you're not going to be judged on one game, and you're going to be able to progress over time. Of course, you have to continue to earn those reps. You have to continue to improve. Obviously, at the end of the day, winning is really the only thing that matters. But I like what I'm seeing here from Bryce Young.